Serial killing isn't just a man's game. There are plenty of women murderers out there too. While women serial killers are much less common than their male counterparts, history is full of killers of the fairer sex. In this video, we've put together the 13 most famous women serial killers of all time. At number 1 we have Aileen Wuornos. Operating as a sex worker throughout Florida in the late 80s, Wuornos was responsible for the deaths of 7 men in total, all of whom were shot at point-blank range. All of the men who Wuornos killed were clients who'd enlisted her services, but according to Wuornos, all of the clients turned violent. Her murders were allegedly all acts of self-defense, although Wuornos later retracted these claims. Wuornos was arrested in 1991 and sentenced to death. She was executed by lethal injection in 2002. To this day, she's one of the most culturally relevant serial killers. At number 2 we have Lizzie Borden. She took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. While this poem might not be completely factually accurate, it's enough to give you an overview of Lizzie Borden's atrocious crimes. In 1892, 32-year-old Lizzie Borden was accused of killing her father and stepmother after both were found murdered with an axe in their home. Lizzie was immediately placed as a suspect, as evidence showed she'd burned some of her clothing in the days following the deaths, not to mention she had a strained relationship with both carers. A very public trial followed, and while many people assumed Lizzie's guilt, she was acquitted of the murders in 1893. The case remains officially unsolved, and the Borden boarding house murders remain a staple of popular and true crime culture. At number 3 we have Myra Hindley along with her partner Ian Brady. Myra Hindley was one half of the infamous Moors murderers from Manchester, UK. Between 1963 and 1965, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley abducted and killed a total of 5 children or teenagers, stabbing or strangling them and then burying their bodies on the Manchester moors. The killers regularly returned to the burial sites to pose for photographs. They were caught in October 1965 and both sentenced to life imprisonment, narrowly missing the death penalty due to being abolished the same year. A mountain of evidence confirmed their guilt, including a 16-minute tape of them torturing one of their victims. The case became one of the most widespread murder cases in UK history, and still to this day, Myra Hindley is considered to be the gold standard of evil women in the UK. She passed away in 2002 from a brain. Number 4, Belle Gunness was a violent murderer who may have slain a total of around 40 people, including her husbands and children, up and down Illinois and Indiana. Gunness was a Norwegian immigrant who came to America in 1881 in search of wealth. In 1884, Gunness married her first husband, and very quickly he died of heart failure. The second husband followed, along with a baby daughter, both of whom suffered the same fate. Gunness began posting Lonely Hearts columns in local magazines to entice men to her farmhouse. Once there, she would take their money and kill them. It was only after her farmhouse burned down that authorities discovered the bodies of 40 men and children. Mysteriously, Gunness vanished, never to be heard from again. In 1908, one of Gunness's farmhands revealed that the whole arson incident had been planned and Gunness had fled with her money. Number 5, Jane Toppan, also known as Jolly Jane due to her cheerful attitude, was a nurse who moved her way through families throughout the New England area. Quite mysteriously, many of her patients died under care. Unbeknownst to the families of her patients, Toppan was injecting lethal amounts of morphine and atropine into them, both for hedonistic and experimental purposes. After an entire family was wiped out under her care, authorities became suspicious and carried out autopsies on the victims. There, they discovered the true extent of Toppan's activities. Over the course of 20 years, Toppan carried out at least 31 murders, although she confessed to killing somewhere in the region of the old lady killer. Juana Barraza was a professional wrestler and serial killer from Mexico City, Mexico. Between 1998 and 2006, 16 elderly women were found strangled to death throughout Mexico City. All of the victims were aged 60 or over, lived alone and were specifically targeted by Barraza. She would knock on their doors and pretend to be a government worker. Once she gained the trust of her victims, Barraza would attack and strangle them with phone cables or items of clothing. Barraza was apprehended in 2006 and sentenced to a staggering 759 years in prison, where she still remains to this day. Her motivation to kill allegedly stems from her hatred of her mother, who allowed men to rape Barraza. Number 7. Rose West. Along with her husband Fred, the Wests were a serial killer duo who committed a series of heinous acts, including killing several of their own children. Between 1967 and 1987 in Gloucestershire, England, Fred and Rose West ran what later became known as the House of Horrors. The home was a den of domestic violence, cruel beatings, incest, torture and murder. After police were tipped off the West's own daughter, the real extent of their crimes became known. 9 sets of human remains were discovered in the West's garden. More bodies then turned up around the area, including at the West's previous home where police found the body of Fred's stepdaughter. In a nearby field, the remains of Fred's ex-wife and mistress were also discovered. Both Fred and Rose were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, where Rose remains. To this day, she denies any involvement with the murders, although there exists a good amount. Number 8. Nancy Hazel, or Nanny Doss, was a serial killer responsible for the deaths of 11 people over a 30-year period, including her partners and children. Like a lot of women murderers, Doss favored poison to dispatch her victims. Her first murders were of that of her own children, whom Doss's husband returned home one afternoon in 1920 to find them dead. In a similar fashion, relatives of Doss continued to pass away under suspicious circumstances until a local doctor ordered an autopsy on the recently deceased. Soon, it came to light they all had traces of forensic in their system. In total, it was discovered that Doss had killed 4 husbands, 2 children, 2 sisters, her mother, 2 grand. Number 9. Known as the Black Widow, Judy Buenoano was a devious serial killer who murdered her husband, son and boyfriend over the span of 12 years. In 1963, Buenoano married her husband, James Goodyear. Over the next 8 years, Buenoano gradually slipped arsenic into Goodyear's meals until the poison gradually wore down his body. He died in 1971, allowing Buenoano to collect a large insurance payout. The next year, Buenoano met a new boyfriend, Bobby Morris. After taking out a series of life insurance policies on him, Morris began to suffer the same symptoms as Goodyear. In 1977, he endured the same fate. Finally, in 1980, Buenoano did the same thing to her son, Michael. After being weakened by the poison, Buenoano took Michael out rowing and capsized the boat. Michael, took weak to keep himself afloat, drowned. Buenoano's crimes were uncovered in 1984. She was sentenced to death and executed in the electric chair in 1990. Number 10. Amy Archer Gilligan was an angel of death, the herald shipment of her day. She ran a nursing home in Windsor, Connecticut, and used her medical role to kill off elderly women and men for profit. Gilligan opened up her care home in 1901, and over the ensuing 13 years, she married 5 different male residents, all of whom died shortly after marrying. After ensuring their lives, Gilligan would use arsenic or strychnine to gradually poison her lovers. When they passed away, Gilligan would collect the life insurance payout. Furthermore, a number of elderly women died under Gilligan's care too, many of which had named Gilligan as their beneficiary in their will in the months prior to their deaths. In total, authorities found 48 deaths from her activities.